Imagine it's 1955, a Saturday evening in a small American town. The air smells like cut grass and your mother's perfume. Something floral, something permanent. The radio in the living room is playing softly. Nat King Cole, maybe. Or perhaps something with a trumpet that curls through the hallway like smoke. A young man is standing at the front door. He arrived 4 minutes early. He is wearing a pressed shirt. His shoes are clean. He is holding a small bouquet. Not roses, because roses are too presumptuous this early, but something simple. Daisies, maybe, picked from a neighbor's garden that afternoon. They cost him nothing but the thought. He rang the doorbell. He waited. He did not check a phone. He did not send a message. He simply stood there, composed, present. Inside, a young woman is finishing her hair. She is not rushing. She knows he will wait. That is what he is supposed to do. Her father answers the door first. They shake hands. There is a conversation, brief, respectful, firm, before she even appears at the top of the stairs. And when she does, the young man does not whistle, does not say, "Wow, you look hot." He says quietly, "You look lovely." And he means every syllable. That moment, that entire choreography of behavior, followed rules. Rules that were never written down anywhere. Rules that almost everyone simply knew. And today, almost every single one of them is gone. What you're about to hear is not a lecture about the past being perfect. The 1950s were complicated. There were serious flaws woven into that era. Social, cultural, deeply human. But inside those complications, there existed a set of unspoken rules around courtship and dating, around how men and women approached one another, that carried a kind of weight and intention that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. Most people today have no idea these rules even existed. Not the obvious ones you've read about. The quiet ones, the small ones, the ones that lived in gestures and silences, and the timing, and the way a man held a door or a woman smiled across a room. These are those rules, and some of them, perhaps more than you'd expect, might make you feel something unexpectedly like longing. This is the rule that perhaps defines everything else on this list. Dating in the 1950s, for most people, had a direction. It was not casual exploration with no destination in mind. It was not a way to pass time or accumulate experiences or construct a more interesting personal narrative. It was not a performance for an audience. It was courtship, in the older, fuller, more serious sense of that word. It meant that when a young man arrived at a front door with daisies and pressed trousers and 4 minutes to spare, somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the nervousness and the careful planning and the quiet conversation with her father, there was an understanding that this could matter, that this could go somewhere, that both people were, in some sense, auditioning for a role in each other's real life. This gave every gesture weight. This is why the curfew mattered, why the father's handshake mattered, why the slowness of physical affection mattered, why the thank you note mattered, why the outside of the sidewalk mattered. Because none of it was casual. It was all building towards something. And perhaps, in the middle of an era where relationships often feel weightless and disposable, where people are treated like options in a catalog, where commitment has become something to be feared rather than sought, that is the most shocking rule of all. Not that they followed it, but that we stopped. Every significant moment of a 1950s courtship happened in physical space. The first conversation, nervous and slightly too formal. the slow building of comfort over weeks and months. The moment something shifted between ordinary and more than ordinary, felt in a glance held a beat too long, in laughter that came too easily, in the strange ache when the evening ended. All of it happened in real time, in real rooms, with real faces, lit by porch lights and diner fluorescents and the flickering glow of a drive-in screen. There was no carefully crafted message that could be revised 12 times before sending. No profile that presented only the angles that photographed well. You showed up as you were. Nervous hands and all. Bad jokes and all. The version of yourself that existed before anyone had time to edit it. And from that unedited, unfiltered, slightly terrifying realness, something genuine could grow. The self-presentation industry, the filters, the profile optimization, the dating coaches who teach you how to curate your digital self, does not exist to help you be known. It exists to help you perform. In 1955, there was no performance. There was only showing up and being seen. A young man in the 1950s who wished to court a woman took genuine interest in what she cared about. Her favorite music, not just the artist, but the specific songs and why. What book she was reading and what she thought of them. Whether she preferred the window seat or the aisle on the bus. What made her laugh until she had to put down her glass. What worried her. What she was proud of. He remembered these things. Not because he wrote them in a notebook. Not because an app prompted him with reminders. Because he had been paying attention. Because the conversation had mattered enough to lodge somewhere permanent. Impressing a woman in that era, genuinely earning her sustained interest, required demonstrating that you had listened, that what she said had stayed. This was not a technique. It was not strategy. It was courtship in its truest form. And it was the beginning of a skill that sustained long marriages, 40 years, sometimes 50, when everything else had changed around them. The simple, daily, renewable habit of paying attention to one specific person. No subscription required. This is perhaps the most quietly profound rule of all. In 1950s courtship, two people could sit together in comfortable silence. On a porch swing as the evening cooled and the fireflies started. In a car parked by a lake, the water perfectly still. The only sound the distant croaking of frogs. In the back row of a movie theater long after the credits had rolled, neither of them quite ready to leave. There was no compulsive need to fill every moment with sound. No anxiety when words paused. No reaching for something, anything, when the conversation rested. Silence, in the language of that era, was itself a form of intimacy. To sit in quiet with someone, easily, naturally, without performance, was a sign that you belonged in each other's presence, that you didn't need to fill the space to justify being there. We have largely lost this. The constant stimulation of modern life, the notifications, the content, the noise deliberately engineered to fill every available second of human attention, has made silence feel like a failure, like something went wrong. There is an entire industry, podcasts, playlists, ambient noise apps, background TV, built specifically to prevent people from sitting in silence. In 1955, two people sat on a porch as the night came in. And that was enough. That was, in fact, everything. In the 1950s, a broken date required real justification. Illness, family emergency, something of genuine weight. Not, I'm tired. Not, I don't really feel up to it. Not a sudden change of mood at the last moment communicated through a device from across town. If you said you would be there, you were there. This sounds rigid, and perhaps it was, but inside that rigidity was something important. Your word meant something. The simple act of saying, "I'll pick you up at 7," was a small promise. And small promises, kept consistently, were the entire architecture of trustworthy character. The young man who canceled without good reason was not just being inconvenient. He was revealing something about himself, something people remembered. Today, last-minute cancellations have become so normalized that some dating apps now include features specifically designed to manage the expectation of being stood up. There are entire Reddit communities dedicated to the experience of being canceled on. The 1950s would have found this not just rude, but almost morally bewildering. Your word was a small, serious, precious thing. You did not spend it carelessly. There were no phones on the table. Not because phones didn't exist. They did, just not the kind you could carry. But because the person across from you was the point. Dates often involved very little. A walk through the neighborhood as the streetlights came on. A shared soda at the counter of a drugstore. The seats slightly sticky. The jukebox in the corner playing something sweet and low. A slow drive with the windows down and the warm summer air coming through. And they talked. They asked questions and listened to the full answers. They watched each other's faces when something funny was said, something sad remembered, something vulnerable quietly offered. The conversation itself was the evening. It was the activity, the entertainment, the destination. Today, the entertainment industry, streaming services, content platforms, restaurants with screens on every wall, has effectively made silence between two people feel like a problem requiring a solution. There is always something to look at that is not each other. In 1955, there was only each other. And from that constraint, that beautiful, simple constraint, something real had to grow. Or it didn't. And then you knew. A date was a reason to look your best. Not your most fashionable, not the most expensive, your best. Which in 1955 usually meant something already hanging in the closet, already owned, already pressed. A young woman would spend real time preparing. Her dress was pressed the night before. Her hair was set in the afternoon. She wore something with care and intention. Nothing bought specifically for the occasion. Nothing ordered online. Just the best version of what she already had. A young man wore a clean shirt and trousers. His hair was combed. He smelled of something simple and clean. Soap, maybe, and a small amount of something from a bottle that cost very little. Nobody had to ask. Nobody had to be reminded. No stylist was consulted. No outfit was planned across multiple apps. It was simply understood that the other person was worth the effort of appearing well. Today, there is an entire economy built around the anxiety of what to wear on a date. Fast fashion, styling subscriptions, outfit planning apps, all to solve a problem that in 1955 was solved by pressing whatever you already owned and standing up straight. This was not about vanity. It was about saying, without speaking, "This evening matters to me. You matter to me." When a couple had been dating for some time and wished to make their relationship exclusive, it was marked. He gave her something to wear. His class ring, perhaps, heavy and slightly too large for her finger. Or his varsity pin, pressed into her palm with a weight that meant something beyond its metal. She wore it, visibly, with intention. This was called going steady, and it was a public declaration. Everyone who saw that ring on her finger understood immediately what it meant. There was no ambiguity, no subtext, no need for a conversation about what are we. There was no long, shapeless corridor of undefined in-between, that ambiguous space where so many modern relationships quietly dissolve. The moment was named. The transition was marked. Something was exchanged. Something was worn. The relationship status industry, the apps, the features, the terminology, the endless cultural conversation about labels, generates billions of dollars annually, largely to answer a question that a class ring solved in 1955. For free. With weight. with intention. Reputation was a real and fragile thing in 1950s courtship. Not just for women. The women carried the heavier burden, and this was deeply unfair. But for everyone involved. A young man who spoke poorly of a woman he had dated, who shared intimate details with his friends at the barbershop, who exaggerated or invented over a bottle of Coca-Cola, he would find doors closing, fathers remembering, communities having very long memories. There was an informal system of social accountability that required discretion. What happened in the privacy of a date largely stayed in the privacy of a date. The sound of that discretion was a kind of silence, a conspicuous, deliberate silence that said, what passed between us is ours. Today, we live in an era of public oversharing, where the private details of relationships are posted, rated, discussed, and dissected before the relationship has even fully begun. There are entire platforms built around broadcasting the intimate, and they are enormously profitable. The 1950s understood, instinctively, culturally, that some things are sacred precisely because they are kept between two people. Privacy was not secrecy. It was respect. Slowly is almost too subtle a word. Glacially might be closer. Holding hands on a first date was considered quite forward. A kiss on the first date was not guaranteed. And if it happened, it was almost always at the end of the evening, at the door. Brief and soft, and almost unbearably meaningful. There was a whole unspoken language of physical proximity in the 1950s, moving slightly closer on a bench, fingers brushing when something was passed across the table, the way a hand hovered near the small of a back without quite touching, close enough to feel the warmth, not close enough to presume. Each small advance meant something. Each was noticed. Each landed with a weight that the modern world has almost entirely lost. Because nothing was rushed, every gesture carried gravity. A first real embrace, in the context of that era, carried a weight that entire physical relationships don't carry today. The modern world has largely removed that architecture of slow accumulation, replaced it with immediacy, with abundance, with the idea that more and faster is better. And what's been lost is the extraordinary intimacy of anticipation. The feeling of almost. The electricity of not yet. That feeling cost nothing to create. It only required patience. And patience, it turns out, was the most romantic thing of all. This is perhaps the most debated rule of the era. And yet, in its time, it was simply assumed. The young man paid. For the tickets, for the sodas, for the popcorn, for the gasoline, for the slice of pie at the diner afterward, if there was a diner afterward. There was no negotiation at the counter. No awkward pause when the check arrived. No, should we split it? He had thought about this before he left the house. He knew what things cost. He had the money, or he had saved until he did. A movie ticket in 1955 cost about 50 cents. A soda was a dime. An entire evening out could be arranged for under $2. Today, a single dinner date in a mid-range restaurant can cost $80 before tip. Dating apps charge monthly fees. There are services that plan your dates, select your restaurants, curate your evenings, for a price. An entire industry has been built around the complexity of something that once cost 50 cents and a week of planning. The hidden truth is simple. The 1950s date was inexpensive because it was intentional. The value was not in the price. It was in the thought. She had a time she needed to be home, and he was responsible for that time. Not her, him. If she was due home by 11, he thought about 11 all evening. He watched the clock above the diner counter. He felt it in the back of his mind during every song at the drive-in. He planned the route home before they ever left. He would rather arrive 7 minutes early and sit in the car in the quiet dark, the engine ticking as it cooled, talking softly until it was time to walk her to the door, than risk a single minute past the agreed hour. Because arriving late meant something. It meant he could not be trusted with what mattered most. There's something almost meditative about this rule. It required him to be present in time, to carry the whole evening in his awareness, not just the parts that were pleasant. The modern world has largely abandoned curfews as archaic, and in many ways, rightly so. But what left with the curfew was the idea that someone else's peace of mind was worth organizing your entire evening around. That is not a small thing to lose. Not to the curb. Not a text that said, "Here." Not a honk from the driveway. He walked to the front door. He knocked. He stood there in the night air, in the cold, or the heat, or the rain if necessary. Visible, accountable, present. This was not considered extraordinary. It was the minimum. To honk from the curb was considered an insult. To her family, to the evening itself. There was something in that short walk from the car to the door, the sound of his shoes on the path, the porch light coming on, the moment before the knock, that carried a kind of intention no text message has ever managed to replicate. It said, "You are worth the effort of 12 steps." Today, the rideshare economy has made it normal to send someone a pin and wait. The effort of arrival has been designed out of modern life, packaged and outsourced. In 1955, he walked to the door. And somehow, in those 12 steps, everything necessary was communicated. There was no such thing as, "Hey, you free tonight?" A proper invitation required time. At minimum, several days, often a week. The young man would telephone, standing in the kitchen, most likely, cord stretching across the counter, the rest of the family within earshot, and he would make a specific proposal. "I'd like to take you to the drive-in on Friday evening. We'd leave at 7. Specific, deliberate, committed. This meant he had thought about it. He had considered what she might enjoy. He had arranged transportation. He had thought carefully about money and whether he had enough. There was no ambiguity in the invitation, no vagueness that could be mistaken for disinterest, no half-invitation that left her wondering if it was real. Today, the average person sends 17 messages negotiating a single plan before anything is confirmed. Entire evenings are lost to the logistics of deciding where to go. The dating industry now sells experiences specifically designed to answer the question of what to do. Dinner subscriptions, activity boxes, curated date night kits. All to solve the problem of a man who didn't think ahead. In 1955, he thought ahead. It cost him nothing but a week of consideration and a phone call from the kitchen. The 1950s understood something simple. Clarity is a form of respect. Not as a formality, not as a joke. You asked before the first real date even began. A young man would present himself, physically, in person, to her father. He would introduce himself clearly. He would explain his intentions. He would stand in the hallway of a house that smelled like dinner and wood polish and answer whatever was asked of him. And the father would look at him. Not his profile, not his follower count, his face, his posture, his eyes when he spoke. This conversation could last 5 minutes or 45. There was no set duration. It lasted as long as it needed to. There was something happening in that exchange that felt almost ancient, a transfer of trust, an acknowledgement that this young woman was valued, that approaching her required more than a swipe in the right direction. Today, we call it old-fashioned, controlling even. But there was a hidden truth inside it. It forced young men to be accountable before they had even begun. It set a tone of seriousness from the very first breath. No dating app charges a subscription fee to teach accountability. But a father in a hallway, asking quiet questions, did it for free. And the young woman upstairs, listening to the low murmur of voices below, she knew, whatever happened next, that she was being protected. In the early part of the decade especially, in more traditional households, a first date did not always mean two people alone. An older sibling might come along, a family friend, sometimes a younger brother or sister who sat in the back seat and said very little but saw everything. This sounds suffocating to modern ears, and perhaps it was. But here is what the chaperone actually created, without anyone intending it. It forced the relationship to develop through conversation, through wit, through the kind of connection that can be built in the presence of other people, which, it turns out, is actually the deeper and more durable kind. You could not rely on physical proximity to build tension. You had to be genuinely interesting. You had to make her laugh with someone else in the room. There was something almost elegant in that constraint. No industry profits from it. No app facilitates it. It was simply a family member in the backseat, eating a sandwich, watching the road. And somehow, from that awkward configuration, real feeling had to find its way through. After a date, any date, even a simple one, the young woman wrote a note. Not a text, not a message. A handwritten note on real paper, with a real pen, sealed in an envelope, and mailed or hand-delivered within 2 days. The note was brief, gracious, specific. She mentioned something from the evening, the film they'd seen, a joke he'd told, the song that had been playing when they arrived. It meant she had been present, that she remembered, that the evening had mattered enough to revisit in ink. He would receive it and feel something that no notification ping has ever quite replicated. The weight of a small envelope, the slight roughness of good stationery, the particular intimacy of someone else's handwriting. Today, the greeting card industry charges $6 for a pre-written sentiment. The stationery aisle shrinks every year. The handwritten note has become so rare that receiving one feels almost shocking. In 1955, it was simply courtesy. But inside that courtesy was something the modern world has largely traded away. The proof that you were thinking about someone when they were no longer in the room. This one is so small that most people under 40 have never heard of it. When a man and a woman walked together down a street, the man always positioned himself on the outside, the side closest to the road. She walked on the inside, closest to the buildings. There was no discussion about this, no negotiation. He simply moved there, quietly, as they stepped onto the sidewalk together. The origin was practical. In an earlier era, horses and carriages could splash mud, or worse. A gentleman absorbed that risk. She did not. By the 1950s, the horses were long gone, but the gesture remained, because it had become something more than practicality. It had become a language. It said, I am between you and whatever might come from that direction. I am here. Today, couples walk side by side, with no thought to position. And why would they? The danger is largely gone. But so is the gesture, and with it, the quiet, daily reminder that someone was paying attention to where you stood. It cost nothing. It required only awareness, and it happened every single time they walked anywhere together. The self-help industry now sells books on how to make your partner feel safe and seen. In 1955, a man just moved to the outside of the sidewalk. Somewhere between then and now, something shifted. Not all at once, slowly. The way the light changes in a room as the afternoon moves, so gradually you don't notice until the shadows are somewhere completely different and the warmth you were sitting in is simply gone. The formality faded. The rituals dissolved. The unspoken rules lost their voice, one by one, until they were simply silent. And modern relationships inherited the space left behind. Faster, louder, more abundant in choice, and sometimes, somehow, lonelier. This is not a call to return to the past. The past was imperfect in ways we should never romanticize. But there is something worth sitting with, in the quiet. The idea that love, real, lasting love, might be better grown slowly, in person, with intention, with the kind of small, consistent gestures that say, without words, you are worth the effort. That the young man who walked 12 steps from his car to her front door understood something. That the woman who wrote a thank you note on real paper understood something. That the two of them, sitting in silence on a porch as the fireflies came out, understood something. That those things, those small, simple, nearly free things, were not nothing. They were everything. Maybe the rules weren't about control. Maybe they were about care. And maybe, in the quiet, honest spaces of your own life, you already feel what has been lost. And already know, somewhere deep and certain, what it would mean to begin finding it again. If this stayed with you, if it brought back something you'd heard in your grandparents' voices, or made you look at your own relationships with different eyes, there is another video waiting for you. It's just there, at the end of this one. And if the past still has anything left to teach us, and I believe it does, it's probably worth a few more quiet minutes to find out.